Hey there, Novelty Hill Janik family. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to be looking at two wines. One current release, we're releasing our Weinbau Vineyard Cabernet Sauvignon from Janik. And we're also going to be pairing this with a vintage selection, 2010 library wine from Weinbau Vineyard. This is the second vintage, the 2010 that we bottled about 10 years ago, and it's always fun to go back and see how things are going, coming along with the progress of the wine as it ages. So what I have here is a glass of each, and we wanted to kind of talk about similarities, differences between vintages, what makes the vineyard unique and special, and what my thoughts as a winemaker are on these two vintages. So first of all, Weinbau Vineyard, you're probably familiar with it. Mike Janik brings up the vineyard in conversation quite a bit. He's been working with it for quite a long time. And one of the unique things about the vineyard, I would have to say, is an individual who's been there from the early 80s, I believe. I think he started with Sagemore Farms in late 1970s and became part of the Weinbau crew in the early 80s. Miguel Rodriguez is his name, and he is somebody that is truly special. He knows this vineyard like no one else, from the soil to the vine to the grape. He is instrumental in everything within the vineyard, and he is one of the big reasons why this wine is so special. The differences between the vintages are interesting because I set out to choose a back vintage, and I gravitated towards the 2010 vintage because it doesn't really get much notoriety, and that's interesting. It was a cool vintage, and I think a lot of people sort of skipped over it, but the wines we've made in 2010, and I know a lot of other wineries share this same thought, the wines we made are fantastic. They're elegant, they've got great ageability to them, and they're very well balanced. And the 2017 vintage, a little bit warmer overall, I would say in tasting them, I was a bit surprised because I found myself thinking that what I was tasting in the 2017 vintage was kind of maybe representative in what the 2010 is tasting like now. Maybe this is a snapshot of 2010 as to where we're going to get with the 17. The vintages overall, even though we were waiting for the heat in 2010, we had a nice, fairly normal start to the vintage, and then the heat, we kept waiting on the heat. It eventually showed up in September, and we had this nice, long, wonderful September where we had the nice warm temperatures and everything reached maturity. Almost perfect numbers in our estimation for grapes when they came in with sugar ripeness, pH and TA, acidity levels and such, and the wines are just so elegant. They've always been that way. This is aging gracefully. So the blends are slightly different here, but overall they're somewhat consistent across the board that we find from vintage to vintage. The 2017 vintage, we had a cool spring, and we were waiting for the heat, and then all of a sudden the heat took off, and it was quite warm. And then in September the heat slowly tapered off, and we were waiting for that last push of heat to send the grapes over that edge so we could harvest with appropriate numbers and phenolic ripeness. So interesting also that they were harvested within a few days of each other when you go back and look at the different vintages. So I found that kind of unique and interesting, and I found it kind of eye-opening for me as a winemaker to go back and taste through these things and realize that even though the 2010 vintage was a little bit cooler, thought of as a little bit softer vintage overall, I think it really compares favorably with the 2017. So I hope you really enjoy this. I've been enjoying all of these wines. This wine has great ageability. It's one of my favorite wines to lay down in the cellar. Weinbau Vineyard Cabernet Sauvignon. Enjoy. I hope you find yourself well and happy, and thank you very much.